One of the fascinating elements of people leadership is how complex we are as humans. There can be unforeseen consequences to even the most simple change. Now, for those of us who haven't been through a merger or an acquisition, the scale of change involved in merging dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of new team members into a cohesive unit could seem completely daunting. Now, my guest today, Tanya Lightbody, is the Chief People Officer of Anthesis Group, a global sustainability consultant and one of the fastest growth businesses in the UK. They are one of, I would say, only a few companies that's genuinely changing the world. And I'm really proud that they've been a client of Instant Impact for the last 4 years. So we've been a part of that incredible journey. They're highly acquisitive and they've bought companies all over the world. Tanya's working life has been equally global, and I believe you practiced all over the place: South Africa, US, UK. I'm sure only scratching the surface there. So I can't think of anyone better placed to explore such a challenging topic. Tanya, welcome to We Need to Talk About HR.
Hi, Felix. Good to be here.
So the first question of this podcast seems almost as challenging as where I'd even start the process of integrating a business that Instant Impact had just bought. So maybe the first question is, where do you even start that kind of journey as a people leader?
I mean, for Anthesis in particular, but I think for a lot of organizations, it starts with culture and that culture alignment. And I've always said that one of the beauties of Anthesis is having such a closed, or not closed is not the right word, but such a clear view of their purpose has meant that aligning to that has been important to do at a due diligence stage, so before we even made the acquisition. So our integration journey starts at that point when you're doing that matchmaking during the dating scene, as I call it, from a due diligence perspective. And what is the organization that we're acquiring's value set, and what is their purpose? And in 99.9% of instances, the alignment to purpose has been our first obstacle to overcome. And once that's done, the integration's been almost more simple to do.
Do you think that you get a bit of an unfair advantage when it comes to the purpose alignment? I mean, obviously, Anthesis has such a clear purpose, such a clear mission. And I would imagine the businesses that you're acquiring, are they also in the sustainability space? Are they also working towards helping the world to get to sort of, I guess, net zero?
Yes and no. So it's been interesting. I'd say so Anthesis is 11 years old this year, and we've done 26 acquisitions in that 11 years. And I'd say in the first 5-6 years, the majority of them were in the sustainability space in some shape or form. So with the direct requirements of mitigating the impact of climate change. But in the last couple of years, we've also expanded beyond that to bring in different skill sets where organizations are still purpose driven, but they might have a slightly different approach to how they're doing that. So we've acquired a couple of branding agencies, which have brought into our stable in terms of expanding our narrative with our clients. So we talk about guiding our clients to sustainable performance. And to do that, we need to have people who are both technically oriented, but also can do the communication and can do the brand positioning. So we are seeing an expansion of what does it mean to mitigate the impact of climate change into this much broader context of purpose, as well as things like, so what about the social impact of climate change and how do we address that? And our clients are demanding that. So we are going much more broader than the historical. But yeah, to your question, is it an unfair advantage? I think in this day and age, even your stalwarts of industry have to have purpose to be able to attract talent.
And how strongly do you feel about the culture alignment why is it so important?
It's important because you're doing hard work. So we talk about high impact, high impact is going to require hard work, and it's an urgent piece because it's happening now. So if you don't have a culturally aligned business, then you're not going to be all drawing in the same direction. And we all know when you work with teams, if people are working really hard, if they're not aligned on what they're trying to achieve, then you get really strange behaviors and become very individualistic, and that's not going to support what you're trying to achieve as a business.
I completely agree with that. If you have, I suppose, the culture, and let's take that as broad as possible definition, your sort of working style, the way you approach work, the way you think about the workplace, and then I suppose every company has their own, or many companies have their own mission. This is the dent we want to make in the world. If the missions are quite different, but the cultures are similar, is that doable as well? Or do you think that you need does the sort of the mission or the purpose of the organization, does that need to be aligned as well?
It's a good question. I was just thinking, because our CEO always talks about unity in the essentials and understanding and kindness in the non-essentials. And I think that, to me, feels how you start differentiating from a culture perspective. So if you're clear that on brand, on strategy, on mission, I think you have to be aligned. Those are the kind of the essentials and people approach. But the non-essentials can be differentiators, which you're proud of. So you can talk to the simple, the almost the obvious pieces, like you can be in different countries, have different cultural approaches or different interpretations. But to your question around if you have different missions, I think that would be quite difficult, even if you have a culture of empowerment and collaboration and understanding, which we all aspire to have, and the fact that you want to have high performance integrated into that. I think if you don't have a mission that is aligned, you're still going to struggle, because there has to be some kind of or semblance of unity around what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that unity word's really fascinating. I have seen businesses approach M&A as a sort of, I think the term is a house of brands sort of approach, where you have for those unfamiliar, you have a group structure, and then you have the different businesses that you've bought operating more or less as they were before, same brand, same client base, but they try and share clients and cross-sell as much as they can, and they sometimes build sort of shared centers of excellence. That's one approach. And then the other is you buy companies, and as quickly as you can, you integrate them into the organization. What approach do you believe in?
I mean, I'm not sure it's a one size fits all, but I'd say the journey we've been on is we started at that house of brands type approach, and over a 3-year period integrated and became single brand and so forth. But now, as we've grown to the stage we are and to be the size we are, and with the investment that we've got, we're much quicker becoming a fully integrated organization. So branding is happening within the first 6 months of acquisition, and we're trying to be on the same systems. I mean, those are always more challenging in small to medium-sized businesses. Systems, well, I think even in large businesses, those are always the challenge that kind of hold you back. But the idea that you are a single organization with a single brand from day one is something that we're thinking plays well with our clients. And even clients that have been very loyal to the organizations we've merged with have been really excited. We had one client write into us and say, it's like my 2 best friends getting married. So that's been brilliant. That's given us, the stage upon which we could actually then make sure that people feel they understand who we are and what we're doing. So we try and do that as quickly as possible. And therefore, you've got that continuum of the journey all the way through.
So merging the brands, merging the workforces for companies, then I suppose if you're looking for businesses that are very culture and mission purpose driven, can it make it quite difficult to, I suppose, re-win the hearts and minds of the workforce to the Anthesis way, as opposed to the business that you've acquired or you've merged with?
As I said, in due diligence, we're already doing that assessment of where we're aligned and where we may not be. Our acquisitions tend to be quite small businesses, founder-led. So already there's an interesting overlap because we're founder-led as well. But then you've got a number of entrepreneurial founder-led businesses coming into your stable. So there's quite a lot of work to do around, so what does that mean for us? What does it mean for the leaders that we're so used to being inspired by? Where are they going to land up in the leadership structure? Who will they be? Who will my clients be? Will I still be on the same client projects? So we do a lot of work around that. And some of it's as simple as running Q&A sessions in person and actually flashing out what are the differences? What do you think works? What do you think doesn't work? One of our acquisitions we made earlier this year, we moved into their office, and it was quite interesting. People were like, so you've moved into my house? I said, yes, we have moved into your house. And we're sharing the furniture, and we're sharing the space. So that's been quite interesting. And that's flashed out a lot of things around, we've tended to be a hybrid approach. So, a couple of days from the office, a couple of days from home. This organization everyone works from the office all week. So that's been interesting as well in terms of how do you adapt to that. And then we've had to make some compromises on both sides. But ultimately, we come back to what are we here to achieve and what are we trying to do. And you mentioned the collaboration on clients. I think that's one of the most powerful ways to integrate businesses. Because when you're working on a client project together and you're delivering to a client and you're excited by that, almost all the other stuff falls away.
That's fascinating. I think there's a it's almost that sort of, the client work forces you into an environment where you're pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely.
And then suddenly you've got and I don't mean a them versus us in a negative sense at all, but it makes a clear distinction. We are delivering, you are the client.
Exactly.
So we have the same aches and pains.
Yeah, exactly.
As the team delivering.
Exactly.
So I think, that's fascinating. Let's talk about leadership. You've hit on one of my topics that I'm really, really interested in. Now, obviously a little, I suppose a little, not self-serving, that's the wrong word. I guess I've got a vested interest in finding out about this, being a founder of a business myself. Not that we've got any sort of intention at the moment to sell, but I've been always fascinated by this concept of buying a business with strong leadership, maybe even, and that probably extends to strong management as well, that sort of level below, and then figuring out where in the, I say pecking order, but because I can't think of a new, the right sort of infrastructure, the levels.
Yeah.
How do you, I must start at due diligence right from the very beginning, but I'd love to hear about that process of working with leadership and figuring out where they end up in the new org.
Yeah, it's I don't think there's a simple answer to it. I think it's personality driven. I think it's, again, it's mission driven. It's what do the individuals want to achieve. But we're in due diligence at the moment with an organization, and I met with one of the co-founders last week, and people who know me know I love a walking meeting. So we were doing a walking meeting, and one of my questions was, so what are your aspirations beyond the exit? Yeah, and are those aspirations immediate, or are they longer term? And it's really, so those are the types of things to understand up front in terms of those aspirations. And then the next question is, so what are your expectations coming into the organization in terms of where you play a part, and how do you continue to help us develop and create and build this amazing opportunity that we think we have for impacting in the world? And once you can answer those questions and then talk about what that means in the organization, that's a starting point. And the acquisitions we made earlier this year, I had those conversations with the founders. And what I've actually done there is I'm working with some really interesting leadership coaches to help them decide what their narrative becomes. And how does that evolve? And how do they then adapt themselves to this new environment? Because they've gone from being a founder to being an executive. And they're not necessarily sitting on the exco, they're not necessarily on the board, but it's more about, so how do they continue to maintain what they've been working towards and feel like they're driving that impact and still have a significant part to play. So I'm not sure that's a clear answer for you, but just working with them and thinking about how we facilitate that, and then putting coaching programs in place to support them as well. And also fleshing it out. Some of it, one of the founders have come in and said, well, it wasn't what I was expecting. Okay, so what were you expecting, and how do we help with that? And how do we support that? So it is open, upfront, honest conversations. And it's just difficult sometimes, because not everybody wants to have those difficult conversations. But you need to, otherwise you're going to land up in a situation where somebody feels disempowered, or they feel they've been sidelined, in the same ways that you have to say to them, you can't carry on in the way you were. So unfortunately, it's not all about how you used to do things, it's how do you now adjust to that, but not in a way that takes away from what you've built, and recognizing that.
So I suppose I was hoping for a very clear, simple answer, but I also knew I wasn't going to get one. No, but I think there are a couple of things in what you said that are really fascinating. I think the first is how similar it sounds to making a senior hire, rather than acquisition, which I suppose in a lot of ways is what you're doing. And the other that I really like, and I wonder whether most businesses go through it, is that period of coaching and the sort of acknowledgement that it's going to be a real shift in maybe not just their working style, but also maybe in the way that they identify.
Yeah, and I think also in how they lead, because you know this, when you're the founder and the leader of a business, everything comes through you in some shape or form. And we talk about some entrepreneurs being incredibly controlling because that's what they've built. This is theirs. So now you have to shift that, because you can no longer be in the control of everything. A. And B, you also have to recognize that you're now part of a much broader organization. And I have this constant debate with my senior colleagues around whether we're an entrepreneurial business or an intrapreneurial business. Because entrepreneurism has got some real positives, but also got some negatives when you're trying to scale a business globally across multiple jurisdictions and across multiple service lines, as we refer to. So you've got to think about how does that play out. And if you're quite maverick as a CEO coming into a larger business, then there are going to be some adjustments on both sides that need to be made.
Yeah, out of interest, are you on the we should be an entrepreneurial business side of things, or?
Yeah, we're on the entrepreneurial side of the business because I think there's no clarity around what does it mean to be an entrepreneurial business and still be a medium to large size organization. We're at that classic inflection point where we're no longer a small business, but we're not a big business. And I think it's quite difficult. And I know that, the entrepreneurs in my organization get really quite concerned that I'm trying to take away some of that essence and magic. I'm not. I'm just saying you can no longer be the maverick in the room and do as you please when you please, because you've got shareholders you need to think about and you've got investors you need to think about process around that.
And I think maybe just to build it out as well, it's probably easier to build that entrepreneurial culture when you're a smaller organization, rather than get to a point and say, oh, actually this entrepreneurial style isn't working for us anymore. We've passed that stage. So I understand the desire to build that now. It's really...
Yeah, and you have to make sure that you don't confuse the change from entrepreneurial to intrapreneurial with a level of bureaucracy, because it's not about bureaucracy. And I think you can still, it's the whole keep it simple, stupid, keep it non-hierarchical, keep it, you do need it. And this is the challenge for a lot of businesses as they scale and grow, is that you need systems and processes. And a lot of entrepreneurs, and even though I haven't found my own business, but I feel similarly, I'm not a big process person. I think it stifles innovation, it stifles creativity, but you need process light. So people have clarity around what they're doing and why they're doing it.
It's interesting. I think that culture provides an environment where process light works.
Yeah.
Without that culture piece, this is our way.
Yeah.
You do have to be much more prescriptive around
Absolutely.
how to deliver things. So that's a really interesting challenge. So I think this world of acquiring businesses is really interesting. Mm-hmm. So Instant Impact's nowhere near the size of Anthesis yet. But we're really ambitious. I think we're in that world where a small acquisition over the next sort of year is not beyond the realms of possibility. It's scary.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that freaks me out the most is Instant Impact, like Anthesis in many ways, is a business that's all about our people. We would be buying a company maybe for its tech, but probably for its people and for its market and the relationships that it holds. So if we do it wrong, we lose all of the 100% of the value of the acquisition. We lose if the people leave or they don't work as well for us as they did for the previous company. So I wonder if you could give me a cheat sheet or your advice on if a business is considering an acquisition, what are the so we've spoken about leadership already, but what are the other conversations that you'd recommend having before acquisition to maximize the chance of it working?
I'm just thinking I think the culture and leadership piece is really important. For me, it's the expectation setting. So what are the expectations of the business that's going to be acquired? Why are they selling? What's in it for them? Why is that decision process happened? Similarly with yourselves, it's that kind of that goes both ways. But once you've had a clear view on expectations and the anticipation of what happens post-acquisition, you can then work towards some of the more normal due diligence pieces which come up in any due diligence. So that would be my first one. The other one, interestingly enough, is definitely around anything around incentive or reward, because that's a conversation that nobody thinks to have, and then you've committed to a budget to achieve as the acquired organization, and then something happens because actually a lot of your leaders have been distracted through the due diligence process and the acquisition process. So you've taken your eye off the ball, not realizing it, and you're behind budget suddenly. So that realistic conversation about what is it going to look like, what are we committing to, and what are we expecting from a, I suppose, reward perspective in terms of the people we've got in our organization and what have we committed there, but also from a budget delivery perspective. So there's no surprises. I mean, insofar as you can avoid those surprises.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I've always been interested, not in the, not necessarily in the one business buying another business, but in the sort of institutional investors world, venture capital, private equity.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated at where they stop their due diligence process. So usually I see people doing pretty thorough analysis of C-level.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, as far as I've seen, it sort of tends to stop there. Maybe it goes down to departmental heads.
Yeah.
But I've always been fascinated in, if I were investing in a company, I think I'd be really interested in doing a deep dive on each department head, making sure they're ready to scale, making sure they understand the challenges. I probably want to speak to some more junior people to understand, to your point, the culture. When you're acquiring a business to truly merge, like Anthesis does, do you do that more detailed?
It's not in the way you're describing, but I mean, you definitely do, I suppose, some informal reference checking. The bane of my life is Glassdoor. I think it's, apologies to any fans of Glassdoor, but I think it's a very lopsided view of things, and it's not always objective, but investors like it. So you'll see any organization that's getting ready for sale or investment or anything, suddenly their Glassdoor, they really paying attention to it, and they're responding to it, and everyone's looking at it. But it's a very one-sided view, so you can use that as an input. Also, what we found is, or definitely with our due diligence, with our capital raise, they did a lot of interviews with former employees.
Really?
Yeah, to understand why they left, what the organization was like, and even clients and so forth. So the due diligence is a little bit more in depth than that in terms of. So we do some of that as well. We've got a business intelligence arm of our business, so there's element of that gets done as well. We do that kind of tell us a little more, or what are the things we're doing here, and then actually having more explicit conversations when you're going through the disclosures. When you're doing the legal due diligence, you can see some stuff comes up and you think, oh, that looks really interesting, can we have a conversation about that? So I do think that our organizations are doing a little bit more in-depth, looking at engagement surveys, understanding the feedback from a cultural perspective as well. So that's becoming much more disclosable. I mean, our engagement survey, one of the key points of our relationship with one of our investors is our engagement survey score. So that's one of the measures that we have to report on. So you're seeing a lot more of that kind of stuff as well.
Great, that's fascinating. We've spoken a lot about the work that you do to, I suppose, understand the businesses that you're acquiring. What do you have to do to your business? Because I can imagine that there is a sense of, I can imagine there could be a sense of jeopardy when you're a senior leader at an acquisitive business, that you never know what business you're gonna buy, and then suddenly you're one person and you've got an identical skill set to someone else, or they're slightly better, slightly more experienced than you, or more aligned to the long-term vision. What kind of prep work do you have to do internally?
So I suppose the first thing we do is make sure that all the relevant individuals are involved in the due diligence process and get to meet the people. When we're looking at we've got a great corporate development chief director who makes sure that we're looking at the pipeline and understanding what skills we're bringing in and what talent we're bringing in and what work we're bringing in, to make sure that that's aligned to what we've already got in the organization. But it's not perfect. And you're right, there'll be people who come in and go, oh, wow, this person's much more skilled at this. Should we rethink how we do that? But the intention is never to replace or superimpose acquired businesses into the organization. And there's a lot of listening that has to happen and a lot of conversation. And we have to be really careful we don't fall into the trap of shiny new toy. Oh, this is much better. Can't believe we didn't have this before, because the organization does definitely sense and feel that. So again, as with the acquired organization, it's important from an internal perspective. We start doing pulse sessions, what we call them. They're like brown bag lunch type recorded sessions to get to know the business, understand their clientele, understand the work they do. We did a series of these with one of the acquisitions we made. So every Friday for 45 minutes, you could dial in and see what they were doing and what kind of work they were doing. So really just thinking through that cultural harmonization. And then where there are difficult or sticky situations, having the conversation. It's never easy. There's no easy answer because people don't always want to have that upfront conversation as well. But we are much more mindful now than we probably were a couple of years ago around the impact of bringing in new businesses on the existing organization. And then also having people who've gone through the process talk about it and have conversations about how they're feeling and how they're experiencing things.
And that's something that's really rung true in this interview today is always sounds stupid when you say something like this, but just asking people how they feel. Those Q&A sessions, those informal chats, the walking meetings, I'm sure are just absolute huge sources of intel.
Yeah, you can spend a lot of time looking at different frameworks and different academic research around cultural integration, and you can think about whether how do you set up a proper due diligence program and integration program. You can do all those things, and we do. We've got Gantt charts coming out of our ears telling us what to do in our systems. But ultimately, as you say, it's a people business. So it's about relationships, and how do you build those relationships? How do you nurture those relationships? And allow yourself to get to a point where you can have honest conversations. And those are the difficult things to do. It's much easier to avoid the conversation and be really unhappy and upset about something than to go out and ask the question outright and then think about how do you tackle and fix it.
All of that takes time, though, doesn't it? So when you're acquiring a business, let's say it's aligned to software engineering, all of those people need to be aligned into the organization. So would you, for example, reduce targets on the relevant department to give them time to integrate that team? What kind of allowances do you have to give, not just your own team in the people function, but then also the different departments to get it right?
So what we've done to date is we've kind of created almost like an incubation phase. So we've made an acquisition. We haven't integrated them 100% off day one. So day one tends to be 6 months down the line to give people time to get used to it. So what we say to our acquirees is nothing's going to change on day one. You're going to feel exactly as you did on day 29. But what we are starting to do is starting to look at where the best alignments are and how do we do that. So how do we make sure from a financial perspective we're doing the right reporting, we're capturing everything correctly. From a people perspective, we're doing the Q&As, we're having those in-person conversations, we're getting to know people. And then from an IT integration perspective, that's always actually the most complicated piece, bringing people into your environment, because especially when you've had some situations where we've integrated much more creative-based organizations. So they're on Google and they're on Macs, and that's very different to the world that has historically been built. So even those types of things become quite... So having a slower onboarding process has been what we've tried to do. And in the absence of, not in the absence, but in the event of where we've taken our time and gone through this incubation process, we've then been able to use our materials and say, okay, we're onboarding you as if you were a new hire per se, as an entire organization. We're buddying you up, and this is what it looks like. But the first 6 months very much is as is, while you get all that ready to go.
I really like that. And I think whether it's a new hire or a full-on acquisition, I think companies often underestimate how long it takes to get to grips with how a business works.
Absolutely.
To understand their DNA, and it's hard. You can't. I was speaking to the CEO of RLMS, a company called Workaround. We said, I think the thing we agreed on is you can't record an online module for all of that stuff.
You can't.
It has to be osmosis.
It has to. And people have to be willing to engage in it as well. I think that's the challenge. So I suppose the things we haven't talked about are things like, so what happens when people come on board and they go, this is just not what I was planning. This is not what I expected. And we haven't had, touch wood, any abject failure from that perspective yet. But I definitely think as we continue to scale and grow, there will be people who go, and even people that are in the organization already who go, well, I joined a business that was 200 people and I really liked that and I love that intimacy of that. But now you're 1,400 people. That wasn't what I was planning. So there's the other side of the coin, is having those conversations and what that means for people. And then just being, I suppose it's and maybe I'm a little bit different here, like if somebody really is not happy and that's not what's working for them, then being the adult and having a good conversation about, well, what does the next step look like and how do I support you to get there?
I think it's so important, that bit, Tanya, to be honest with you. I think unfortunately so much of I guess the status quo of the workplace is based around kind of a lie, right?
Yeah.
I'm hiring you and you've told me you're going to work here for the rest of your life, and I'm telling you that there's going to be a job here for the rest of your life, and I'm sure that's true with acquisitions as well. And I think just having grown-up conversations with people and say, look, is this aligned to where you want to be? Are you enjoying it here? And then just saying, no, okay, well, look, if you were here, I'd be helping you be a great employee. If you don't want to be here, I'll help you find a great gig afterwards that is better suited to you.
Absolutely. I think more of those conversations would make the workplace a much better place. I mean, the organization I used to work for a long period of time, it's exactly what we did. You know, and the person who did your reviews wasn't your line manager, because then you can have those honest and upfront conversations around, does this still work for me in my career? Am I still progressing in the way I wanted to? Yes, no, and then decide what we're going to do from there.
I think that's so good. So there's a company we work with who you know as well called Pinpoint. Their CEO Tom came on the podcast, and they every 2 years they'll sign people up for what they call a 2-year tour, which is they speak to them about their long-term career aspirations. Okay, is this job suited to that? Great. Well, we'll commit to 2 years of you working here, and you commit to 2 years of working here, and we'll get you towards that long-term view
aspiration. And
2 years, next 2 years comes around. If the answer's no, they then will employ them until they find their next job, and wish them well and sort of move them along the way and help them get to that world. Now, of course, if you build a culture like that, you're going to end up retaining people for much longer than you would have done otherwise.
You hope so. I think it's about the performance piece as well. So you've got to make sure that people don't get confused about that. So, well, in that case, I don't have to perform because I've got a 2-year guarantee.
Absolutely right. And I think that performance piece runs, especially when you're in a scaling organization and you're thinking, oh, actually, you know what, can we keep growing if we lose this person, if they're doing an okay job? I think that actually keeping that bar of excellence and
that bar of excellence for growing and scaling businesses is a real challenge, because at which point is that bar of excellence a bar of excellence or a loyalty because you've been with me since day one? And that's a real challenge. And same thing when you talk about entrepreneurial founders and how they've built the business and that, because at some point it may not be the skill set that they've got to continue to lead that business. And how do they recognize that? Because that's really tough to be able, and to have the maturity and the insight to stand there and go, do you know, I absolutely was the right person to get us to this point. I'm not sure I'm the right person to get us to that point, because that's not the same as what it was to get from there to here. So I think those are quite challenging conversations as well. And sometimes in that acquisition landscape, part of that conversation is exactly what's happening there, because that founder group has decided now that they need a bigger investor, or they want to grow, or it's the right thing for the business. And they need to have that conversation. Well, do they want to be part of that or not?
Yeah. And I guess this is going to feel more and more extreme for you as you get bigger and bigger. I always look back to, I think a lot of the big 4 accounting firms, they made, I think it felt like about a 3-year time period where they all bought a sort of mid-sized strategy consultancy, and basically lost the vast majority of people who were originally at that company over a 5-10 year period. But I suppose they got the brand, they got all the rest of it. And I think maybe as Anthesis grows, or as a business grows, then maybe you acquire for different reasons, and the keenness of keeping those key individuals is felt less sharply. But I guess it's
it'll be interesting to see what happens, because I think for us, in the world of sustainability, irrespective of whether you're doing a brand communication or a double materiality assessment, there isn't a plethora of sustainability expertise out there. So I still think we're on that journey where every acquisition, more likely than not, those co-founders are integral to the success of the organization, and that's why we've identified them. But I can see that potentially down the road we'll get to a point where you go, actually, what we need is delivery expertise. We need execution expertise, and we can't recruit it fast enough. So maybe we need to acquire it in, and then what does that look like? And then you actually, to your point, that's exactly what the big 4 were doing, is just getting the middle section of the business in, because that's what they wanted.
Fascinating. I can't believe that we've run out of time, Tanya. Thank you so much for coming
That's
on.
a
It was
pleasure.
really fascinating, and I'm sure that listeners today will have got some really, really good practical advice for their own M&A journeys.
Good luck.
Well, tune in next time, everyone. Thanks for joining us.